Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the movie Freaky. This movie ultimately has kind of a long, illustrious history of body snatching or switching. Like movies, I would say much more body swapping. Normally, you have movies like Change Up, which is the Ryan Reynolds, Jason Bateman film. Two guys pee in a fountain and switch bodies. You have I think Ben Savage ultimately did the guy from Wonder Years did a body swapping movie where he changes lives with his father, and that happens. A lot of times we have like a father son body swapping like movie. Then we also have the Freaky Friday Jamie Lee Curtis Lindsay Lohan movie, which I thought was interesting. We have in here a an interesting, I guess, concept where we have a normal girl who's in high school and a serial murderer in this movie, which I guess is an interesting concept. Also, when going into the Rob Schneider movie Hot Chick, which ultimately has some vibes to otherwise be familiar to this movie, I admittedly there were some notions in this. I was like, yeah, that's the hot chick moment. That's that's the Rob Schneider hot chick moment. If you've never seen the movie Hot Chick, it's funny enough. You can go ahead and check it out. It actually has a pretty good cast in it as well. So let's talk about this very unspoiler like, and then we'll get into spoilers eventually. So very much in the beginning of this, I would just go out of my way to say that this movie is fun. I think this movie easily wins me over just because it's the horror genre and it makes fun of the horror genre at some aspects. When going into approaching this, I feel like this style is very much like a Happy Death Day to me as far as execution wise. Uh, Reasonably, I thought that this movie was very Vince Vaughn heavy. I'm like, man, did he really have to carry this movie? If yeah, you could really say that if Vince Vaughn is in it, of course he has to stand out. But I was like, man, like Vince Vaughn is really in this movie, and then everybody else is just kind of like the background. Like every once in a while, you have a good joke here and there coming from someone else, but like 80% of this movie is Vince Vaughn, and a lot of people are at some points just there. So anyways, I thought this was like a popcorn kind of fun movie where you could just have fun with it and reasonably. I think this one I probably was really mocking this movie, and I was like, "Oh yeah, another body swap movie." I was rolling my eyes at it consistently. I was like, "God, this movie's gonna be stupid." And when I actually went into it, I was like, "You know what? This movie is actually better than I thought it was gonna be." I think that's probably why I'm reviewing it and having it as a positive light, even though really it's kind of a silly and or stupid film. I thought that it was funny. I thought that it was funny enough, even though reasonably everything kind of felt at points kind of predictable or kind of formulaic when you have a scene presented where a guy's going into the bathroom and I'm like, oh, okay, we're gonna have this moment now. Okay, great. We're gonna have a comedic thromp of this now. Okay, yeah, I could understand this approach. So, if anything, this my memory of this movie is not exactly like I just seen this. Now I'm reviewing this. So, if anything, there might be some foggy or hazy things going on, or some things that I say inaccurately. But honestly, I'm just like I'm going off this instead of just doing it as just watching it a minute ago, just watching it over a span of like 2 days, and then plus kind of going back and kind of like cutting through scene to scene to scene quickly just to kind of go, oh, okay, I remember a bulk of this movie, so let's review it. So let's go into mentioning that you have at some points a like there were some visually interesting scenes eventually when you have Miley who is running away from this killer in this movie. I thought that those parts were actually very visually interesting. I thought that those scenes were actually visually fun, and then also I thought that there was some cliche things going on within this movie also, because you have to I guess, like forcibly, they were just like, well, this has to be really dipping into the horror genre, so we have to do a ton of cliche like things. But I did like how they were trying to do some interesting things, uh, really based off of Miley's sister in this film. I was like, oh, okay, so like at least like the main character easily has like a kind of a different approach to where they could easily call upon a person to help them if need be. But anyways, so this movie was at some points like some of it was stupid, some of it was funny, some of it was silly, and reasonably in between that you have some kind of quasi interesting deaths going on here. Reasonably, there was some foreshadowing deaths going on as well. Kind of noting that eventually this person is eventually going to go back to get this person, or definitely like put them on her list. So that's all that I think I'm going to go out of my way to say about this. In a very cryptic or very non spoiler like way. So, anyways, let's go into spoilers. Hopefully, I can quickly kind of branch this out and do it without a doubt. So, spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to get to spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this film, we have to quite understand how eventually Vince Vaughn is going to get this dagger that has to have like its own freaking name and has to have this like this really standout like visual with a skull on the tip of the the handle of the dagger, and has to look all scully and cool and stuff like that. To where the dagger bizarrely has to stand out. It can't just be any normal dagger. Oh no. So in the very beginning of this film, we have to set up how Vince Vaughn's character, the Butcher, gets this dagger, and we have to set this up by having a bunch of people in a home trying to do like a get together or party or whatever, all while looking at these interesting home artifacts. And eventually, Vince Vaughn is opening up. Eventually, there's a crate opening of showcasing a weapon of choice at some points in this movie. So, or some point early on in this movie. So, we eventually have all these kids seemingly killed in any normal way that you would kill somebody in a horror film. A bulk of it is just to kind of show Vince Vaughn's strength going on in this movie. I had seen another movie where I had probably reviewed at some point with Vince Vaughn in it, and he was for a bulk of that movie in prison. I think it was like 66 blocks or something, or 66 block. I think was probably a movie showcasing how strong Vince Vaughn's character was. But anyways, so we have it to where it seems that there is a aftermath of this to let everybody know, hey, yeah, the butcher is on the loose, everybody be scared of the Blissfield Butcher. So, really coinciding with this is a football game that ultimately has some cheerleaders. They're all doing their thing, and ultimately they have a mascot. And I'm like, I bet the mascot is the main character of this movie. I'm like, I'm having hot chick like vibes with Rob Schneider being in the bee costume and being the mascot, and like here's where our focal point of character is gonna unmask, and we're gonna see her. So after this whole football game goes off, we have them kind of you showcasing her best friends quickly, and then them leaving, and then ultimately she is just sitting on a bench waiting to have her ride come for her. But instead of having a ride come for her, the butcher comes for her instead, because ultimately this girl is waiting on this bench and she's seeing somebody in the distant shadows, and he's like, oh, please don't let it be the butcher, anyone but the butcher, don't let it be the butcher, butcher. Anyways, so this person's face comes out of the shadows a lot more, and of course he's wearing, as per usual, because we see it in the very beginning of this film, this like Jason Hockey-esque like mask. And she's like, oh my god, it's the butcher. So she runs. Vince Vaughn eventually chases after her. Eventually, they are on this football field. We have this knife in the traditional way, gets as high point as possible to slice this girl in the shoulder. And I think they had to show that like full moon dagger like traditional thing where if you're outside you have to show that whole thing. So what ends up happening is that this girl gets stabbed, but so does Vince Vaughn in the same shoulder. So this girl eventually gets away from the butcher and gets out scot-free, because ultimately the butcher ends up just kind of being baffled by a a stab that also went into him as well. So reasonably, we have it to where these people end up kind of having a getaway scene where ultimately they fill out a report and this and that, because reasonably Miley's sister, which Miley is the main character in this movie, is a police officer. Reasonably, they have to kind of go through the traditional look of an aftermath of a crime scene, this and that. But anyways, so uh, or we have to do the traditional like aftermath of every single after crime scene in this. Anyways, so we wake up to these two people wake up the next day in different bodies. Miley is, of course, just kind of really baffled or confused a little bit, and but ultimately she says nothing as the butcher. So reasonably during this time now, every single time I'm going to be talking about the butcher, it's going to be Miley as the butcher, and Miley is going to be Vince Vaughn, who is ultimately the person. So body swapping now. Every single time I'm going to talk about, I'll probably talk about Miley being in Vince Vaughn, and ultimately the butcher is going to be Miley. So the butcher, who is again Miley now, she ultimately puts on some interesting looking clothes that doesn't look like, of course, previous Miley. She ends up going and putting on a red leather jacket, which is going to be used not only once but twice to mention how great this outfit is that the killer is wearing in this movie. So, because of course, like Vince Vaughn character can't let this go. But anyways, so in this movie, we also have Vince Vaughn seemingly waking up in a desolate like place, some kind of hobo-ish like background. But bizarrely, like you have this guy's clothes that are like seeming like brand new black like sweatshirt and pants or whatever, as if they like just bought it off the rack somewhere and gave him this. You would have thought that they would have like tethered or worn down this guy's clothes, but no, like his clothes look like they were like brand new off the rack somewhere, and I don't understand that. I'm like, shouldn't this person have like kind of ratty or just like weird looking clothes? But instead, it's like he's, I don't know. But anyways, we eventually have it to where Vince Vaughn wakes up and he is now Miley. Ultimately, to ask a hobo-ish like person, hey, like what do I look like to you? Because ultimately he's like, why do I sound different? It's like, hey, hobo, like what do I look like to you? And so ultimately the guy describes what this guy looks like. It's like, oh my god. So we have it to where within this movie that the butcher, who is now in a red leather jacket, is going and killing some of her students while in class. Because ultimately, when the butcher was with these kids, like we had like bottles going through people's mouths and all kinds of these like heinous like kills and deaths and stuff like that. So recently, when we get to the school, we're gonna have it to where these deaths are gonna be quasi interesting. We have one death where the new butcher breaks a racket in half and shoves it into someone's head. Eventually, we also have a cryogenic death that happens with some girl, and ultimately, Vince Vaughn's character finds this girl later on. So eventually, we also have uh, Miley eventually being ridiculed by her teacher that is supposed to like is her woodshop like teacher that is gonna like is gonna make her retake a test and everything like that. So Miley, the new butcher, the butcher, is looking at this person like, yeah, I'm coming for you. Like I'm gonna get you. Good. Thank you for letting me know that I'm gonna come back to retake this test because I'm gonna take you instead. So going into this, we have Vince Vaughn who needs to go back into the school to convince his two best friends that he is not a killer, that recently he is actually their best friend. And he's so baffled and so confused how he got to this point. So, if anything, once Vince Vaughn gets to his best friends, of course, they naturally assume that he's the butcher and they start running away. But he is trying to convince them, no, hey man, like I really am who I am. Like believe me. Like trust everything I say. Even stuff that he's trying to mention to them, like they're not right away convinced. So eventually we have Miley's two best friends running for their lives. At some point we have Josh and Nyla who Josh has to mention how like he is gay and Nyla is black, and so reasonably there's no way that they're gonna live through this, uh, which I thought was a funny joke. If anything, the character who plays Josh is actually really like I really like this character. I kind of like I he had some pretty good, if not one liners. He had some kind of interesting stuff to bring to the table within this movie, which I kind of thought was funny at some points. So we eventually have it to where they are in this kitchen and Vince Vaughn is still trying to convince them of who he is. So they're like throwing pots at him, they're trying to like defend themselves with pots and stuff like that. to where the point to where eventually Vince Vaughn has to do a cheerleading dance for them. And ultimately, they are very familiar with this dance. So they're like, oh my God, like, maybe this is him. And so ultimately, he reveals some like personal stuff about them. And eventually, they feel easily just like, oh, okay, I think we can believe this. So eventually, they high five one another in only the way that a best friend can high five one another. And Vince Vaughn's like, right, right, yeah, I'm your friend. Like, believe me. So we get to the point here to where I'm gonna pause here for a second. So we get in this movie and we have it to now, okay, the best friends are believing Vince Vaughn's character, so now they have to try and get Miley, who is now the butcher, under wraps. And so recently they make their way to finding Miley, who had killed any number of people by now, even her after school woodshop teacher that she saws in half, as per usual, any way that you would usually kill somebody who's a woodshop teacher. At first, like, Miley thinks that she can overpower this teacher, but she is sadly wrong. And so at first, like, he gets the upper hand on her, but eventually she gets the upper hand on him and has to figure out how to adjust to being a smaller girl and has to eventually chop him in half. So eventually, Miley is walking through the school, and Vince and Josh and Nyla are conveniently there to get her, and that's where Vince Vaughn has to mention, like, oh my God, like she's wearing, like, he's wearing something really different, and it's actually like really a good look. I need to like I need to steal that. Um, so if anything, we have Miley, who is now the butcher, yelling to the fact now that, oh my God, the butcher is here! Everybody run! It's the butcher! It's the butcher! Everybody! And so Vince Vaughn crazily runs out to eventually go to some mall to where he has to hide his identity. Um, Before that moment, though, before they meet Miley, eventually Vince Vaughn has to pee standing up for the first time, and they have to find out all this information about this dagger. And I guess they have to also Google it to show a picture of what the dagger is and the name of it. And I thought that that scene was so goofy where Vince Vaughn has to, like, show us, like, having him pee standing up for the first time, and he has to question if he has to wipe or whatever. And so ultimately he's like even like flopping his Johnson around and just like really that stuff was kind of dumb, to be brutally honest. But if anyways, we eventually I thought that whole scene was kind of just stupid. Like, we have to showcase the dagger and how it seems to be very important and find out all the information about it, and we have to find out like how long that these people will have before this curse becomes permanent. So reasonably, Vince Vaughn finds Miley, and Miley outs them out, to where eventually they have to scramble to uh, seemingly go shopping to find Vince Vaughn a new identity or some kind of equivalent to wearing a mask or something. And bizarrely, they end up going to this mall where ultimately Vince Vaughn is going to hide out in this dressing room. And so what ends up happening is that a girl that is coincidentally Miley's mother is actually a a retail worker at this store, and she's giving a guy some clothes to try on. ultimately mentioning before about some guys that she had met and had given them pink and blue polos, and this and that. And ultimately, she brings up her lost husband, and ultimately is asking if Vince Vaughn is available, or hey, how about we go for a movie sometime? And Vince Vaughn is like, you know what? That would be great. The only thing is I'm married. And she's like, oh my God. But coincidentally, we have Miley's sister who is a police officer, which I actually really liked in this movie because I'm like, yeah, here's the best way to have this, have a police officer in this movie. And it's um, coincidentally Miley's sister. And so Miley's sister comes in and mentions that ultimately they had spotted the butcher at this school, and so reasonably that what gets these people to scramble off, to where eventually Josh and Nyla give Vince Vaughn a Alan Rogers mask, to where he can't even breathe in out of it. But anyways, so we eventually have to figure out how we're going to get Miley back into the fray. And so Miley eventually appears within this kind of like arcade bar-ish like environment where guys are like playing like uh, ski hockey or whatever, or pool or whatever they were playing. Ultimately, this is a memory of 2 days. So we ultimately have it to where Miley goes in here, and here's where I'm like, okay, now we're gonna actually have the butcher actually like say some things, which I'm like, great. I'm like, so this person isn't gonna be dead silent throughout a bulk of this movie. Great. So recently, some of the guys that are from the football team are all like flexing their muscles in front of this girl and like showcasing how like freaking like, yeah, I bet you're gonna like me, I bet you're gonna come after me. And so one of the guys slaps Miley's character on the butt, and Miley whispers in his ear that you make me as dry as sandpaper and I can't wait to kill you. She immediately grabs some, like, I would say knife, but it looks like a box cutter of sorts, and heads to the bathroom and tries to lure over one of the other football players, which I believe is Booker. Booker is like, oh my God, this girl is so hot, and she's like, come hither, and he's like, yeah. So we have it to where seemingly we also have to have moments of Vince Vaughn's character seemingly being strong at some points to showcase the diverse. If the butcher who is now Miley is kind of having to adjust to not being as strong as a character like her woodshop teacher, we also have to have Vince Vaughn's character like picking some kids up in bathrooms and ultimately realizing, oh my God, I guess I really am this strong. And we also have Vince Vaughn, who eventually is just going to out strength some people and just kind of mention to everybody, just like, man, I'm strong. Yeah, we get it. So, anyways, eventually we get this mad scramble into this place where Miley and Booker are eventually going to a putt putt. It seems like there's a putt putt that has like a Halloween like theme, and that is where eventually Josh, Vince Vaughn, and Nyla are going to eventually get Miley and have to try to repetitiously convince Booker that Miley is Vince Vaughn. So we have it to where Miley is tied up in Josh's house, and now Vince Vaughn has to convince Booker that this is Miley you're talking to. So ultimately, again, he has to mention how, like, this is not normally how you would see Miley. Uh, but again, he's really he's still really fascinated about how about this look that this girl has, and he really wants to like pull this off eventually after this is all done. But anyways, so we have it to where Vince Vaughn is trying to convince Booker that he is who he's saying he is, and eventually we get to a point where Vince Vaughn is mentioning some poem, mentioning a sonnet of sorts, and Booker's like, "Oh my god, yeah, I can believe that this is Miley now," because somebody a week ago put a poem in his locker, and ultimately he didn't know who that was, and so Vince Vaughn admits it's like, yeah, I don't know why I did it, but I just felt that I needed to. And so, yeah, that was me. That was me, Booker. That was me trying to do this, trying to do, trying to like tell you like how I felt about you. So Booker is now like, okay, I'm convinced. Like, so what are we gonna do now? Ultimately, now we have to scramble to get the dagger because ultimately they don't have the dagger right now, and so that is what they're going to do next. And so while that is going on, we have Josh's mom come home from work. I believe she's a flight attendant of sorts. And so now we have this interesting conversation with Josh being at home, Miley tied up. And Miley is trying to, who is now the butcher, trying to get her ropes untied. And so we have it to where Josh's mom comes home. Ultimately, Josh is watching over Miley, and recently it gets to the point of course, Josh's mom asking, "Hey, what are you guys doing? You guys playing? Are you guys having fun?" Because ultimately, she's a little creeped out about her son right now. Because why wouldn't she? Uh, it seems like Miley is putting out this like, no, no, don't, he's gonna kill me, he's gonna, but of course she's muffling all this, so like, that's all she's saying. So it's like Spider-Man, if you realistically did Spider-Man with this mask the whole time, you'd probably hear him go, you wouldn't be able to clearly hear everything that he says, but that's the whole magic of editing. So we have it to where Miley is trying to undo her ropes. It seems that Josh's mother isn't buying the whole, like, oh, they're just playing around kind of thing. And ultimately, we have Josh's mom that is kind of like mentioning, like, are you guys doing some role playing like game? Are you doing some role play? And Josh is like, Mom, yes. I have to finally tell you the truth. Mom, I'm straight. And Josh's mom is like, oh, sure, I can believe a number of things, but you being straight is not one of them. And he's like, Mom, believe me, I'm straight. So it gets to a point where eventually the butcher ends up getting his hands untied and eventually coming with a knife to come after Josh and his mother. Josh and his mother are trying to hold the fort down, and ultimately, Josh is scrambling to tell his mom, hey, lock all the other doors and close all the windows and make sure she can't get in. Eventually, Miley is shouting out how like worthless this guy is and this and that, and But then eventually we have it to where Miley eventually skedaddles to go and try to kill other people. Because why stay here at a point where you can't get these people? It's pointless. So while this is going on, we eventually have Vince Vaughn who is trying to get this knife, and eventually we have it to where Miley's sister ultimately ends up picking up Vince Vaughn and arresting him. And while she is trying to arrest him and put him into jail, Vince Vaughn overpowers her and puts her into the jail cell instead. Ultimately, the entire time apologizing about all this, and because this butcher is now Miley. So they're off. They have the dagger to ultimately get to Miley. And while this is going on, Miley is, of course, trying to kill the douchebaggery guy that she had told that she was making him dry as sandpaper and that she couldn't wait to kill him. Well, she was coming back to kill him. So eventually this guy is very much cocky at first and flexing his muscles and just kind of mentioning how yeah, there's no girl that's going to turn me down kind of thing. And we have it to where Miley has a chainsaw to pick to differ. And so this guy is scareless and eventually running off to eventually at some point probably get killed. So we eventually have it to where at the very end of this film, we have this situation where Miley is going back home. And so reasonably, we have it to where we have to convince not only the butcher but then Miley of this whole situation, to convince their Miley's sister and Miley's mother to ultimately believe what is all going on, to ultimately trust what they are doing. And it gets to this interesting point to where ultimately, because what happens here is we have Miley who has to, because we have Nyla and we have Miley's best friends holding Miley down, and eventually Vince Vaughn is going to have to put the dagger into this girl, and eventually for them to switch bodies back. The only thing is we still have an ending to go with in this movie, and the butcher has to come back to Miley's house, and now, of course, Miley and Miley's mother and sister have to go and take Vince Vaughn's character out. And of course, he is overpoweringly strong, so he's got to do all these moves and stuff like that to ultimately be taken down, hit with chairs, of course, in the traditional hitting of chair sense, where a chair has to be broken off of Vince Vaughn. I'm like, yeah, isn't that a little cliche? Come on. So, reasonably, of course, we have it to where Miley is okay. We have the body switching all go well, and everybody has a happy ending besides probably the butcher at the end of all this. And so reasonably, that's how this movie just eventually just kind of siphons off as just having the traditional like, okay, body swap, but then again it's like, well, like you have to have one last scare, you have to have the house moment where now Vince Vaughn has to get his last huzzah, and eventually that's where we have these moments of ending a movie. So at the end of the day, I think that's all I wanted to say about this film. Reasonably, yeah, probably a predictable or formulaic kind of movie, but I thought it was also funny too. But anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.